I'm going to start with not using the mic because I like to use my hands. And no one has ever told me they could not hear me, even people in the back of the room. So if I
You're going to have to speak louder than that.
Yes, okay. So anyway, my name is Patty Ferrick. I retired from the FBI after 30 years of service in June of last year. I have not put a suit on since. And as I talked to Kevin this morning, I felt like I was back in uniform officially as of today. My big plan, of course, was to get a big job, and I was going to take the summer off. But for those of you who are retired, it's really good living, you know. But Kevin and I have some plans in the future. But that being said, I want to tell you a little bit about myself. What we're here to do is talk about the challenges in the FBI. I'm going to speak for about 10-15 minutes. And then I'm going to turn it over to Kevin, who happens to be an expert in terrorism. He's going to talk a little bit about the evolution of terrorism, pre-9/11, 9/11,
I
post-9/11.
need to do this to you, but there are people in the back who can't hear you.
All right, fair enough. I might have to break into song here. So essentially, that's what we're going to do. We know we have short time. Kevin can do a presentation. It could take as many as 8 hours. So we're going to have to try to keep him on track, 30 minutes. But that being said, like I said, my name is Patty Ferrick. I joined the Bureau back in 1987. My father was a cop, my uncles were cops, so it was kind of in my blood. The day I actually realized I really wanted to do this and be in law enforcement, I'm going to bring you back to the 1970s. I don't think anybody here has not been alive in the 70s. You want to tell maybe this young lady right over here, perhaps. If you recall, there was the gas crisis. You know, the prices were crazy, almost $1 a gallon. Can you believe that? Remember the lines, odd days, and one of the crimes that was occurring at the time was gas siphoning. And as it turned out, my neighborhood, my 12-house block, was being attacked by a gas siphoner. So at my 11th birthday, my dad gave me a badge, which I thought was a real FBI cop badge. Apparently it was the shield of his hat. But he gave it to me in a case, and I felt that I was deputized to do what I needed to do. And now that our neighborhood was being attacked, it was my responsibility to catch the culprit. So my friends and I slept out, wore black on a Saturday night, and sure enough, we actually got a license plate of the car that was doing siphoning. So on the way to school, coincidentally, the next day, we see that car in one of the neighboring neighbor's house. So I said to my buddies, "Hey, listen, we gotta look into this." And, "Oh, you are on your own." So after school, by myself, 11 years old, I knock on this woman's door. She answers the door, and I said, "I'd like to speak to the person who owns the car." And she goes, she's looking at me. I'm 11 years old. She goes, "Can I ask what this is about?" "Well, whoever it is committing crimes in my neighborhood. Young lady, give me your phone number. I'm calling your parents." So my dad typically works, now again, 1970, one phone, no answer machine, okay? I am counting on the fact that nobody's going to answer that phone. Sure enough, my dad just got home from work, was asleep for about 15 minutes. When the phone rings, he picks it up. Comes to me, puts me in the car, and he goes, "Young lady, what were you thinking?" And I looked at him and I said, "But Dad, we caught the bad guy." And all of a sudden, he broke into a smile. He goes, "That's my girl." So we went to the Suffolk County Police Department, and I don't know whatever happened, but that was my first big case. It's been downhill ever since. So essentially what I want to talk about, I want to bring you back to 1970. Okay, so one of the challenges in the FBI is collecting information. All right, so in 1970, you probably had one phone. If your dad or mom were willing to allow you some privacy, you might have had a really long cord, right? You might be able to take it in the other room. With one phone, typically what you've heard the expression wiretap, okay? It's one of the techniques the FBI does, and it's one of our most sensitive but good collection platforms to basically find out what people are doing. So in order to get a wiretap, we have to identify a phone that a bad guy is using. I think people might think, well, so-and-so's a bad guy, let's just go up on his phone. No. What you have to do is you have to identify a particular phone, and you have to prove that that person is using that phone specifically for illegal activity. So back in the 70s, typically how we would do that, or even now how we would do that, we have what we call cooperating witnesses. And these are people who actually cooperate and are willing to make a phone call so we could have an illegal conversation on a very specific phone. Once we have that conversation, we can go to a judge and say, "Listen, Judge, Joey Bag of Donuts is using this phone and we would like to wiretap it." One of my favorites. So anyway, so now we're on Joey Bag of Donuts' phone at home. So who else is in the house? The kids are in the house, the wife's in the house, they're all using the same phone. The rules of wiretapping are very specific. We cannot listen to every conversation. So what we would typically do is if the daughter or the son or the wife got on the phone, we would have to shut it down. And typically we would turn the phone on every 30 seconds to see if the conversation is still going. If the conversation is still going, it's the same person, we hang it up. Very easy collection. Maybe on a given day you might have 2, 3, 4, 5 bad conversations. Easy to listen to, easily analyze. Fast forward to today. I want you to think about what you have in your house right now. Think about your phone. How many points of collection are on your phone? You have text messaging. For those of you who are a little more sophisticated, you are using apps, applications. You have voice. You have internet. So when we go up on a phone, think about all of that. We're collecting all of that information. It's very difficult for the FBI because we don't really have the resources to go through all of that. And what do you think the biggest concern for an FBI employee, be an analyst or an agent, when something bad happens? I'll use a terrorist agent, for example. They're not saying, which they should say, oh my God, this is horrible, I can't believe this happened. The first thing that they think of is, I hope I wasn't the person who interviewed that person and said they were not a threat. I hope I didn't have the wiretap where I missed that email that went out because that person told somebody they were about to do something, but we didn't have the manpower or the resources to review that. And then and you've heard that in almost every situation. There's 8 years ago the FBI talked to the Boston bombers, and they basically said they weren't a threat. Well, 8 years ago they weren't a threat. You know, we can't continue to monitor people years and years. You know, I tell a story. It was the place in D.C., the Holocaust Museum. Okay, a gentleman at age 82 decided to go in there and shoot up the Holocaust Museum. We actually said, had we been on that person doing 24-hour surveillance from their age of 25, I'm feeling pretty confident by the time they're 80, we're good. Okay? So we cut the surveillance, and then 2 years later, this person does something, and all of a sudden, FBI, how did you let this happen? So these are the challenges we face. I talk about collection analysis and wiretaps. The other problem we're facing is that new technology is not allowing us to listen to those phone calls anymore. You know, with messaging, with the encryption, with the applications, WhatsApp, we have no visibility on that. So when you think about it, as our technology is getting better, we're not getting visibility on the communications that we historically have gotten. Another challenge for us. Right now, I can tell you, my husband just retired. They have a gang case up in Hartford. They're all using encrypted phones, iPhones. So the days of going up on a gangbanger's phone to listen who he's talking to, who he's selling dope to, who he's engaging with money laundering, we're losing that ability. And we've made some inroads with the previous administration. As you can appreciate, the current administration, we've been a little rocky, you know, with the FBI. Good news is that we're in a much better place than we were a year ago when we did this, my last speech. But these are the challenges that we face. So I don't have answers to those challenges. I just want you to appreciate that. When you hear of privacy laws and, hey, we need to protect the privacy of our citizens, we get that. That's why we have a court. That's why we have a judge to say, hey, listen, do you really have the authority to do a wiretap on this person? Do you have the authority to do a search warrant on this person? We've got these companies, the iPhones, and saying, hey, listen, we don't care what the laws are. It's more important for us and our customers to protect their privacy. So it's only a matter of time before the real bad guys figure that out. So I don't know what the answer is. Like I said, we had some legislation before Congress kind of died on the vine. And I think when we had that legislation, we probably did not have visibility on about 30% of the communications. It's probably closer to 70% right now. So again, these are some of the challenges that we face. Like I said, I don't face them right now. I'm in a good place. But just be mindful of that. You know, when you hear about privacy issues and stuff like that, collection, or the next time something happens and you see, oh my God, the FBI knew about it 8 years ago. Just remember this conversation. That being said, Kevin, I'll turn it over to you.
Good morning. I'm going to use the microphone because I have a 16-year-old son and spent all last night yelling at him, so my voice is a little frayed as a result of that. I keep getting told it gets better as they get older, but I also been told in Connecticut you can leave your kids at a fire station and they'll take them. So I don't know where I am with that right now. Unfortunately, he knows his address, so I think. I still don't let him use a fork, but we're getting there, all right? So I'll use the microphone a little bit as a result of that. You know, it's when Patty and I talk to people, it's very interesting to see, you know, to gauge the audience. I have a really tough time with younger people because they don't have a lot of the same context. It's interesting. Kate, how old are you?
17.
17, so hopefully you're the youngest one here, right? Is anyone younger than 17? Is anyone older than 17? Very good, thank you. Because see how politically correct I was? I had to ask first, that was very good. So when you talk to people, a lot of people have different contexts. And when I talk about it and I talk about national security, it's very interesting to get different people's perspective across the board. I'm sure some of you in here, just from looking around the room, when you went to school, you had drills preparing for a nuclear disaster. How many had that? Yeah. And how many in my generation didn't have those drills? I didn't have those drills. Jeff, you didn't have those drills. And then I ask, how many have had drills related to an active shooter in a school? Think about that. There's a different context, right? So everything we talk about relative to national security, really I'm mindful of where the generation is. Everyone in this room remembers where they were on September 11, 2001, right?
Yes.
How many of you remember the day that JFK was assassinated? Think about that. So it's a different context when we begin to talk about different things relative to national security. You know, my background, I was an agent for a long time. I just retired 3 weeks ago, thank God, all right? Yay, that's it's been a long road, right? It's been a long road, but as Patty said, it's kind of like when you retire, the skies open up and you hear angels. It's great, that's great. So, you know, Patty and I have some really good post-retirement plans. This is a big part of it, as well as what we're doing. And just real quick on my background, you know what, I grew up in the 80s. That was a really great time with great music. And then I decided at the same time, I went to law school. Because when I went to college, I majored in history. And as my father said one day, okay, you're eligible to do two things, teach and sell insurance. So what are you going to do with your life? How many 17-year-olds really know what they want to do with their life, right? So what I did is I said, well, what can I do? And guess what? I went to law school. How about that? And anyone remember the show LA Law? Remember that show? It was great. They all had the mullets, they all had the skinny ties, and they had great cars and a lot of money. That was me. So I go to law school, and I do really good, and I get these great jobs in between the summers. And the one thing I realized, I hate lawyers. I cannot imagine getting up every single day to just squeeze pennies out of everything. It was unbelievable. I was 22, 23 years old, and I was making more money than my father, who had worked his rear end off for years. Wow. So I said, well, I got to do something else. And one day I was at my law school, I'm walking down the hall, and this guy comes up to me and says, hey, you want to join the FBI? And I said, okay. And it took a year, but there was a lot in between. But that's pretty much how I became. So, hey, I started out here in New Haven way back in the early 90s. And, you know, I worked a lot of gangbanger stuff for a long time. I went to headquarters. I worked a lot of Colombian drug trafficking organizations. And, man, that was great. I was focused on gangs and drugs, and that's what I was doing. And I got a great job to be a supervisor, and I was going to the great city of Newark, New Jersey. All right? Has anyone ever been to Newark?
I was born in Newark.
I'm sorry. You were? I'm sorry. Obviously, your parents were just traveling through. That's pretty much how it is. So, you know, at the time, my wife, who was an agent, we were getting married, and she's from Boston, and I'm from Buffalo, and man, I had an opportunity to get a supervisor job in Miami, and we went down there, and she said, absolutely not. And I said, well, the only job left that's open that I've been offered is Newark. And she's like, yes, because it's closer to her mother. So we ended up going to Newark. And I was gonna run a drug squad there. And they had some really huge drug cases. And I was gonna go there, and my wife and I got married in August 17th. Jen, 17th. Just tell her I remember the date. August 17th of 2001. And man, we went on our honeymoon, and I came back, and my first day in Newark was September 11th, 2001. So I arrived in the office to run a drug squad, and within 4 hours, I was involved with pretty much the largest investigation the FBI and the intelligence community and law enforcement has ever engaged in collectively. Since that time, the change, not only in the FBI, but also our culture, has been significant. I look back and we say, hey, on the morning of September 11th, 2001, you could get on a plane with a bottle of water. God help you if you get on the plane right now. Also at the time, if you remember, how many of us remember when you could smoke on a plane, right? I mean, they sat in the back, and some of you probably remember Allegheny Airlines and people there. You remember, how about Pan Am? There's one that was, right? So it changed. You also could get on a plane with a knife. Think about that. You could get on the plane with a knife. Now that has changed. The impact that the events of September 11, 2001 have had on our culture, on our society, on law enforcement, on the intelligence community, and corresponding to our budgets and our political optics has been significant. It has probably been the largest single cultural change relative to our communities in the last 20 years. As a result, the FBI and the intelligence community had significant changes. We spent probably the first from 2001 to 2005 just assessing where we were and targeting what those threats were at that time. From that time, from September 11, 2001 until 2005, we did a lot of work, not only in the United States, identifying different threats, different terrorist threats, but also overseas. People remember the worst job in the world was to be the number 3 guy in Al-Qaeda. Your life expectancy was weeks. We would target them, and they would not be a threat anymore. So the collaboration of law enforcement, the intel community, and the military around the world was a very, very strong emphasis for a number of years after 2001. And if you remember at the time from the Iraqi war and on through that time, that was the major focus in the news. And it was all about what we were doing relative to Iraq, Afghanistan, and around the world. And you would always hear about airstrikes, right? You would always hear about a lot of arrests in the United States, around the world. There were corresponding bombings around the world, which there then would be the reactionary investigation and then law enforcement action. That was a very strong battle rhythm for quite a while. And then all of a sudden, it was kind of a lull, right? If you think about it, it was in the news all the time. How many times do you hear about a terrorist incident or event today? Is it every day? Every week? It's a lot less. We really have been unbelievably successful around the world since September 11, 2001. That threat has dissipated significantly.
What's Sri Lanka that
Just happened. And where is it?
Sri Lanka.
Sri Lanka.
U.S., you said around the world.
Around the world. Sri Lanka. Hey, not the United States. And that's the first one in quite a while. From a very small group that country, which has some capabilities and had some intel, should have probably been more proactive relative to that information. But here in the United States, knock on wood, we've done an unbelievably great job. The military, law enforcement, the intel community has identified our major threats and really has neutralized them around the world. If you remember, there was a lot of terrorist organizations which had a structure. A lot of their structures paralleled organized crime families in gangs as well. They had a hierarchy, they communicated, we would attack their communications, attack their finances, attack their travel, training, operations. We gained intel and we executed operations as a result. And that was unbelievably successful around the world. And at the time I was a supervisor, and then I went to Boston, I was working the stuff, I went around the world, and it was awesome. The work that our military, our intel community, and the law enforcement at the state, local, and federal levels combined is unbelievable. It's unbelievable. And it has benefited the safety and security of this country since that time. Did we learn the hard way? Yeah. Learn the hard way. And since then, those organizations, those groups, I don't want to say they've been neutralized, they're still in existence. However, their impact has been severely limited due to the cooperation and coordination. And really what has come about as a result is a philosophy. These individuals who want to cause harm to our way of life, to the United States, realized it was really tough to have a training camp and train people and travel them and transport them to the United States. So what they began to do is they began to transmit their ideology. And that ideology, specifically through ISIS, has been put out into the ether, as Patty talked about, the internet, through social media. And individuals here in the United States and around the world have grasped onto that ideology, and they have self-initiated action. Before September 11th, 2001, 19 individuals were trained overseas, financed, transported to the United States, set up, and began to coordinate their attacks here. Nowadays, it's really someone who may have some mental illness as well, who is on the internet, who gets propelled, who gets radicalized, who gets angry as a result of what they are consuming via social media and the internet, and then begins to act out on their own. That is the greatest threat that we experience now. You hear about the lone wolf, right? You hear about the individual who is self-propelled to commit these attacks. Those are our greatest threat that we experience now, but also it's the hardest. Kind of easy if you have an organization, they have to communicate, be it IBM, the FBI, or Al-Qaeda. If you have a structured organization, you got to communicate. And there's a lot of opportunities or portals for the intel community and law enforcement to have an understanding of what they're going to do and to exploit that intel and be operational to neutralize those plans. But the stuff that's put out in the ether via social media and consumed by individuals, some of which have mental illness, mental health issues, that is much more difficult. And that's where we are now. We talk about, Patty talked about every threat that we need to look at. Every individual who has a propensity or exhibits some behavior nowadays is a potential individual threat to the safety and security of the United States. And that's what we're looking at nowadays. So when we look at what we call the GWAT, the Global War on Terrorism, man, we've done a great job in the United States. People don't want to say that. They don't want to say it because it's I don't want to jinx myself. But man, have we done a great job. A great job. But it's still a threat. It's still something we keep our finger on the pulse of. But what has really transpired and what it has evolved into is our greatest threats right now are individually, these lone wolves, these individuals who are radicalized via what they consume. And what I consider now our greatest threat against the safety and security of the United States is in the realm of counterintelligence. I cannot begin to tell you how significant a threat the countries of Russia and China are to the safety and security of the United States. On a daily basis, that is what we, being the FBI, the intel community, and our partners, have to identify and neutralize. Their efforts nowadays are specifically on a number of fronts. An economic impact, to obtain our economic secrets, so to speak, to use for profit and gain, or more specifically, to get our information and our intel relative to our military and other intelligence operations. That is our most significant threat nowadays. The old days of spy versus spy, man, anyone remember the mad cartoon of Spy versus Spy, right? Right there, oh, that was great. No more. Everything, how do you think all this counterintelligence stuff is done? It's all cyber, it's all the internet now. And that is where they're focused on. And these two countries are the most significant counterintelligence threat that we experience. And the great example, Director Comey put it once, and it just resonated with me. The Chinese are like the guy who breaks in your house in the middle of the night. They don't care if you're home or away. They don't care if you hear them. They're going to break in, they're going to break all your windows, they're going to turn over all your furniture, and you know what you're missing. And guess what? They don't care. The Russians, you'll never know they're there. You'll never know what they took, because they'll replace it with something else. And you'll never know, because they are the best at what they do. So we have these two adversaries which have two diametrically opposed ways they go about doing counterintelligence activities. So nowadays, in the number of different areas and the different mediums that they begin to have a negative impact on the United States via their counterintelligence activities could go on, and I think, as Patty said, for 8 hours. I tell you this, the Russians are not our friends. They're not our friends.
We know that.
They're not. They never will be. You know, they have a leader of their country. Does anyone know what he did before he became the leader of Russia? He was the head of the KGB. The KGB has gone away. It's now known as the FSB. I've been to Russia a number of times. And as I like to say, I am the most attractive individual on the face of the earth when I'm in Russia. Because they run young ladies at me all the time. It's okay, I can take it. My first time to Russia, I checked into the hotel. Oh, hi, Mr. Klein. Yep, it's the hotel that they have told me I have to stay in. And the first thing they want, of course, and I've been briefed and trained on how to do this, they want my passport. Fine, take my passport. Here you go. I may or may not have others, but that's a whole other issue. And then I'm going to the elevator. And as I'm going to the elevator, it is awesome because this unbelievably attractive red-head young lady gets in the elevator with me. And I'm like, wow, I'm not even in my room yet, and this is really good. So of course I told my wife immediately, no, I didn't. So I get in the elevator and she's like, oh, what floor? And I'm like, I'm not telling you my floor, I'm not gonna go through this. But the point is they really do begin to target a number of individuals to exploit what they can for their own purposes. So when I bring all that up, that is a whole, I could talk about Russian counterintelligence activities pretty much for quite a while. But right now, the takeaway in this very quick presentation is number one, when we talk about terrorism overall, we've done a great job. And nowadays, our most significant threat are these individuals, the combination here in the United States of mental illness, social media absorbing this radical ideology, the free access to weapons and other instruments to which cause destruction. That's our current threat. We have done a phenomenal job against the organized groups which train, transport, and want to do harm to our way of life. And that has been surpassed by what our current threat priority has to be, is the counterintelligence threat that we get from the countries of Russia and China. I know the best way to communicate a lot of that is through your questions. So is that a good time?
Perfect. And actually, I'm
Hoping I don't totally put you on the spot, but thank you, Patty and Kevin, for this exquisite presentation. When I heard you speak last year, so I apologize, I'm going to put both of you guys on the spot. But you told a story about people coming back, I think it was from China. They had been given a gift of a frame. Maybe it was you that was given a gift of a frame, but there was a camera in it. And the person was being, she thinks you talked about it, you think she talked about it, whatever, but I'd like you to tell that story. And the other, so we have quite a few people here who are from New London. And the other thing you guys spoke about is so why is the FBI in Connecticut? Right, that was sort of the big question that got asked when the Sill presentation happened. Why was it here to start with, and why are you guys still here? So.
Give that to Kevin, he's the national security guy. Can you speak to
There you are.
what is in New London that you think might be of interest?
What's the problem?
There you go.
If you just take a step back and say, okay, we're in the state of Connecticut. If any of you have ever, you travel the United States, right? If any of you have ever been to what I call flyover country, right? Okay, flyover country. Those states are really big, right? And there's stuff there, a lot of it is just barren farmland, stuff like that. So we have a real small state, right? We can go from the state line down in Greenwich, or as my uppity friends call it, Old Greenwich, and all the way out to the state line in what, 75 minutes, right? But what do we have in here from a counterintelligence aspect that would be a benefit? Oh, nuclear submarine, right? But what do we have relative to that? It's kind of two-pronged. Do we have them themselves? Yeah, that's what the sub-base is for, right? But what do we have beyond that?
Wide open sea.
Well, where they build them, right? So not only do we have the actual nuclear subs here in Connecticut, not a secret, there was a great picture the other day of one of, I think it was Pennsylvania, going out for its last tour, right? That's going out. But not only do we have them, but we also have the capability to build them. Drive over the bridge and just take a look out to the right, right? They're building. They're like crazy at General Dynamics Electric Boat. But on one side of the river is where they have the sheds that they build the subs. That's where they build them, they weld them. But really where all those capabilities are is on the other side of the river, where they have their engineers and where they do their design and where they do their R&D and where they do their building and where what is located in their offices. It rhymes with computer system, right? That's where that all is across. So we have that. What else do we have in Connecticut? Coast Guard, right? That's good. Yep.
Wide open water.
Oh, Sikorsky, Pratt and Whitney. How about that? Has anyone ever heard of the United Technologies Company, right? All that is here. They build jet engines here in Connecticut at Pratt and Whitney. They build the jet engines that go into our most advanced fighters. Do you think the Chinese want that? Yep. The Chinese, by the way, they've invented gunpowder in like the 1400s and said, we're done, thanks. And everything else, what have they done? They stole it. And who do they steal it from? Us. It's no secret, we can say it, that's fine. That's what they've done. So Connecticut is a target-rich environment for this by what we produce. From the UTC conglomerate to Pratt & Whitney to Sikorsky, where they, helicopters, to the nuclear subs from General Dynamics Electric Boat. Pretty much the gamut, right? So when we look at, Connecticut overall, and when Patty got here, we had one counterintelligence squad. And the Bureau now has expanded that because of all that threat presence that we have and that potential here. So that's why Connecticut is a target-rich environment for a lot of these counterintelligence activities.
It also, from what I remember you saying, explained why, you remember when the Russian subs were hanging out a couple miles off the coast and we were like, why are they doing that? They were hanging out right outside of the New London wide open harbor.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Sir?
Yeah, my understanding is that there's over 1,000 agents behind your FBI personnel in Connecticut. That seems like a lot of people.
How many?
I heard over 1,000.
Over 1,000 FBI agents assigned to Connecticut?
Personnel in Connecticut.
You can take that.
That would be great, and you'd be right, we probably have more agents than work. We actually have 116 agents. Of that are 16 supervisors and 100 FBI agents. We have, how many analysts now?
30.
30 analysts, and the rest are administrative support. So I think we have about 235 employees in Connecticut. To appreciate that, New York has 1,200 agents. Okay, Miami has about 900 agents. So obviously they're much bigger, but quite frankly, I made a pitch to get probably about 10 more people. And 10 may not sound like a lot, but in a state where you have 100, 10 really could make a difference. And again, with the growing counterintelligence threats, gang activity has been pretty steady. We've got gang activity primarily in Bridgeport, Waterbury, Hartford, a little smattering of it in the New London, Waterford area, and of course New Haven. But we pretty much got that under control. But again, the growing threats, of course, is cyber. And one of the biggest challenges for the FBI is getting people to join the FBI who have cyber skills. Okay, we are still a government agency. You can go online and see what we make. When you come in as an agent, you're going to be in GS-10 Step 1. I don't know what that is now, but you can get online and Google it, and you know exactly what you're going to make on your first day in the FBI. We cap out at GS-13 Step 8, which is about $155,000, which is nice. But these guys and these kids are getting cyber trained, and they're going and getting jobs for $300,000 a year. What's worse is they come into the FBI, they get all additional skills, okay, which we give them, and then they take those skills and they leave well before retirement and take big jobs, typically out of Connecticut and New York or Boston. So that's a real challenge, and it's something that the FBI is really trying to think of. They're actually discussing possibly increasing the salaries of the cyber agents. But as you can appreciate, that comes with a whole lot of other HRD issues, fairness, that's not, you know. So I don't know what the answer is. I know that when I left last year, that was something on the table. Instead of them coming in as a 10, maybe coming in as a GS-12 or something like that. But again, we're not talking $300,000. So, but I will say, and I've said this to the people that we do recruit, I said, this job has a moral compass. You are going to make a difference. I mean, yeah, you can go work somewhere else and invent stuff and make a lot of money. But when you see the work that we're doing in the cyber world, and we're teamed up with a number of other private entities, and there's this whole team of folks that do this all day long, and they actually make a difference. So that's what we tell the folks that come in with the cyber skills, that you will have, this job has a moral compass, and you will feel good about going home every day because you made a difference. Maybe you stopped the terrorists. You know, maybe we got online and we found that radicalized kid, which is a long shot, like Kevin said. That's what our most recent problem is. I heard someone say we haven't stopped terrorism. What happens is these guys get radicalized, and then I used to tell the state police, or rather police officers this. When I got here 5 years ago, I kept saying, you know, when something happens, not if something's going to happen, when something happens. How many whens have we had in the last 5 years? Las Vegas, you know, just naming one, Los Angeles. We're almost immune to it now. You hear about a school shooting, you go, oh my God. 24 hours later, they're not even talking about it anymore. So what I would say to the police is that if someone says, I killed a bunch of people because I wanted to, it's a local police crime. If they say I did it under the name of Al-Qaeda, we own it. Okay? LA was a great example. The couple that went out there, okay, husband and wife. What most people don't know about that is they killed 14 people, 15 wound up dying. They left. We lost them. We don't know where they went. You know, we caught them up later. Where did they go? Did they go home and eat? I mean, we're talking about a couple that, you know, people thought were just regular people in the neighborhood, and they were radicalized and just woke up one day. Those are the challenges that we face.
Okay, before, I know there are a zillion questions. I really want to pass the mic around, which may take a little bit of time. I really want you, the question that's lingering throughout all of this, of course, is the Mueller report. So if you could speak to that. If different people have other questions, just start to put your hand up and I'll start to walk around.
Just let me say, I'm turning this over to Kevin because he's such a nerd. He read it.
You know, I begin with Bob Mueller. Patty and I have both had a lot of interaction with Director Mueller. He is an individual that I have the utmost respect for. He is, his integrity is absolutely beyond compare. He's also, you can just tell, he may not be the most personable individual in the world, but that goes with the territory. You know, but if there's one individual who came out, and I have said this since day one as a special counsel with Director Mueller, if he came out and said X, Y, or Z, I can tell you 100% that is what it is. That is how he has always been. That is all my experience with him as well. Right now, it is amazing to just absorb and consume the news right now. You can go from channel to channel and get a different interpretation on the special counsel's report. It is mind-boggling of 408 pages or whatever. I started to print it out, and then my wife may or may not have had a very long diatribe filled with bad words relative to killing forests and things like that. So I stopped printing that out. So I began to read it. I urge you all to read it and to read the footnotes, because it is a huge roadmap as to what was absolutely identified there. And I only have one takeaway. You know, now that I'm retired, that takeaway is, man, we can do so much better with a president of the United States. There's no doubt. You know, and I can say that now that I'm retired, but wow, that is something as I get through that. That is absolutely mind-boggling. But there's enough there in the report that it gives a lot of room that for others who have the authorities and the jurisdiction to begin further proceedings and to further look into some of those activities. But from a specific recommendation from what he was charged with, this report is what he was entitled and what he was required to produce. So I urge everyone to take a look at that.
Thank you very much. Thanks for your presentation. I'm changing the topic a little bit. I didn't know you were going to do the multiple. But when you were talking about lone wolves and mental illness and that, I've heard people talk about, and experts talk about the fact that those lone wolf types that we think about are actually communicating in some overarching way about these terrorist attacks. So when it happens, I don't know, Sri Lanka, but in other places around the world, less so the United States, because you guys have done such a fabulous job, they are communicating, and it's not like the 9/11 people who, had this massive thing, but the ideology is worldwide now.
Right, and the differences in the definition of communication. And a lot of these groups, specifically what we call Daesh or ISIS, they promulgate it, they put it out, and then it's consumed. There may not be direct communication between the two. For everything that has happened since the emergence of ISIS, they have taken responsibility for. They took responsibility for, for the Patriots winning the Super Bowl. They take credit for everything they possibly can. Doesn't mean that they had anything to do with it. Now, a lot of these organizations overseas, if you cold email them and say, hey, I want to join, they may be a little circumspect about where that's coming from. So what they have found to be most valuable is they just put it out there and see who grabs onto it and is absolutely propelled to do something as a result of consuming that ideology.
Okay.
But the communications are rather, we're all over that, yeah.
One question I have, it seems you very carefully avoided mentioning the CIA. Now, would you explain how you coordinate with them and what the difference is, what the FBI covers, if they're covering things overseas versus the CIA?
Absolutely, and I didn't avoid the CIA. Whenever I said intelligence community, that's the CIA. So I refer to it as the intelligence community because they encompass a lot of other acronyms as well. I can tell you we have CIA personnel assigned domestically. When you look at it, their jurisdiction is overseas. They handle everything that is not domestic. Our jurisdiction is domestic, although we have a large presence overseas. Overseas, we coordinate within the embassies, but here we have CIA personnel assigned to our office and every FBI office in the country. So it is a daily basis that we work hand in hand with the CIA across the board. When my last tour at headquarters, I was actually assigned to CIA headquarters. So I worked at CIA headquarters for quite a bit as well. So where it was previously, there was a big separation, and it was pretty much sketched from a lot of legal and policy considerations. Nowadays, it is seamless. Our counterterrorism groups work together out as a group known as LX1, but here domestically we are hand in glove on not only counterterrorism, but also counterintelligence investigation.
Just real simple, and I would say the easiest way to explain the difference is, let's take it from the counterintelligence perspective, all those counterterrorism as well. The FBI's job is to identify spies in this country and recruit them against their home country, okay? Or if we identify an American spy, our job is to prosecute them. Overseas, the CIA is doing the same thing. They're working overseas to identify people with vulnerabilities, perhaps they're destitute, perhaps they've lost their jobs, whatever the case is, and trying to recruit those people to spy on their home country. Likewise, any Americans that are overseas, that are caught spying overseas, the CIA handles. So we have the same mission, it's just one is domestic and one is international.
Thank you.
One of our groups here is legislation and politics. So here's my question. The man that was found, I think he was with the Coast Guard, with that huge cache of
Yep.
weapons,
Yep.
right? He was arrested.
Yep.
Great work.
Yep.
But I understand that he can be released now because
He was released.
so we don't have the legislation to handle his arrest or his,
Well, what happens is there was enough evidence to which there is probable cause that he committed a federal criminal offense. So part of that is not only his activities, but also obtaining these weapons as well. So the charges, and we have to remember, he is not charged with any terrorism-related offense. He is charged with weapons possession. That is it at this time. So now he comes up to, he is detained prior to trial. And in order to determine if someone should be detained, it's a two-pronged test. The first prong is whether or not they are a risk of flight. The second prong is whether or not you're a danger to the community. The risk of flight was alleviated by, one, taking his passport, and two, having a condition that he's under house confinement until trial. So that prong is settled. The second prong is whether or not he's a threat to the community. And due to the fact he's only charged with storing or obtaining these weapons, there was no information relative to what he was going to do them for, what he was going to use them for. Now, that's what he's officially charged with. I can tell you from knowing the case, he was searching on the internet what was the security for Supreme Court justices, where they lived. But in his detention hearing, the defense attorney brought up the fact that what the press conferences said and what the court documents say are two different things. And the magistrate ruled that he should be released pending trial due to the fact that he has not been determined to be a threat to the community based on what has been put forth in the criminal case at this time.
Are you
Now-
watching him?
Well, we're not,
Not us,
not us, but part of his condition is he's at home, I'm sure he has a wonderful bracelet on, and he has to report in. There's a lot of conditions to make sure.
Okay, we have time for just one more question. I know Kevin and Patty have been just incredibly generous with their time, and if you swarm them with more questions, they'll probably stick around to answer them. So, one more question.
Thank you. I would like to ask you about your work in Russia. You said when you go there, and you've been many times, they know who you are, they're watching you from the moment you arrive. So what kind of work are you doing, and how can you work effectively in that oversight?
Well, my times in Russia were for counterterrorism, and I was working with the FSB on a rather large but very successful undercover operation that was taken down, I believe, in 2005. And it was the first joint counterterrorism investigation between the Russian FSB and the FBI at the time. But whenever we travel to a foreign country, we have to get permission to be there. So if Patty and I, working, wanted to go to anywhere from London to Moscow to Cairo, there's requests that are made through our offices, what we refer to as LEGATs in those countries, that are coordinated within the embassy and the local officials to get permission for us to go there. So they know we're coming in our official capacity as FBI special agents, and we're working there. But at the same time, they want to verify what we're doing, and they want to see what we're doing, and they also want to see if there's an opportunity for them to exploit our presence in the country. That happens all over the world with every country, no matter what. It just does. And that's just the way the spy versus spy game is. But my work over there, how to be effective, was very effective because the group I was working with, I worked out of KGB headquarters quite a bit. Wow. And so we were able to do travel and do operations, but their counterintelligence side just wanted to see what I was doing and seeing if there was an opportunity that they could make me interesting to them, or more interesting, I should say. So that's very effective in that, but they also keep an eye on me as well.
Thank you. This has been phenomenal. Can we please give a big hand to these guys? Thank you so much for sharing. So interesting. So many of you know we are about to be moving into the immigration presentation. They're going to take a couple of minutes to set things up. While they're doing that, everybody sees they have a postcard on the table in front of them, right?